This is Dale Maharidge. This is me with Michael Williamson, who is driving. We've driven over 500,000 miles since 1982, documenting workers around the country. In the early 80s, we were hobos. We did a lot of travel by train with the new jobless as they sought work. You start out with the wind in your hair. But if there's any notions of romance about this, it's quickly driven out of you. This is me sleeping, or rather trying to sleep, on a grain car in 1982. I'm a professor at Columbia University. Michael Williamson's a staff photographer at the Washington Post. These sound like fancy jobs, but basically our job description is to drive around and listen to Americans and document their lives. So this is our story and their story in this brief overview of our new book, Someplace Like America, which is really a compilation of all 30 years of our work with emphasis on the present. We're always on the road. These are a few images from some key years selected at random of Michael's work. Workers in America are in trouble. They've been in trouble for a long time. For the last 30 years, it's been a Great Depression for a lot of people. On Wall Street, they've got a lot of money, but it's not trickling down. There's tens of millions of Americans who are hurting. People in power don't want to admit to it. The real experts, the American people, the subject of our new book, they have a whole different story to tell us. We get to know people and we go back and revisit them. This is Mr. Ed Dale. We met him in 2009. He was 56. He'd lost his job. Nobody would hire him. He ended up building this shack out of an old billboard tarp on the bank of the Cumberland River in Nashville. When Michael went back just a few months ago in 2010, after the mass flash flooding, this is what he found. No one's seen Mr. Dale since. We don't know what's happened with him. But for a lot of people, we do know what happened. What follows, here are a couple stories that are in our new book. Back in the early 1980s, they weren't just closing factories and steel mills. They were blowing them up. In 1982, U.S. Steel dynamited the blast furnaces of the Ohio Works in Youngstown, Ohio. We met with two men who worked there, Mr. Marshall and his son, Joe Sr. and Joe Jr. The elder Mr. Marshall had worked in the plant for 37 and a half years. We met them a couple of times and asked them if they could take us on a tour of the ruins. And they did, and it was a very special day. The Mr. Marshall, he'd been in the Normandy D-Day invasion. Out of his unit, he was one of only 4 survivors. And at one point, he paused and whispered to the wind, "What Hitler couldn't do, they did it for him." And then, years later, Bruce Springsteen interpreted this line as, "Them big boys did what Hitler couldn't do." So Bruce was inspired to write 2 songs based on our work on his Ghost of Tom Joad release. We met Bruce in late 1995, and actually a few more times that fall. Then late that winter, Bruce was in Youngstown, Ohio. He wanted to go see the Jenny blast furnace, and we snuck in a back way. It was it was illegal. We basically evaded the guards, and we hung out in the mill and talked about what was going on in America. In 1983, we met the Alexander family. They were homeless in Texas. We set up camp next to them for about a week and got to know them pretty well. They're wonderful people. Theirs is a powerful story of survival. A quarter of a century later, we track them down and we bring their story forward in the new book. There's Jennifer and Matthew. It's been quite a journey for this family. We have something to learn from their story. It's one of the stronger parts of the new book. Another powerful story is that of Sally. We were in Michigan in 2009, and we went to this food bank line. Now, I've been to a lot of food bank lines in my life. It's something I've covered a lot of. This was unusual. These were people you could see at any shopping mall anywhere USA. The economy had hit the upper class very hard, and Michael spotted this woman sitting next to a trailer, Sally. We heard her story. She told us how she lived in a house in the hill. She and her husband had their own business, lost it, bankruptcy, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and here she is, 2 children in line. Not as somber as all this sounds. Sally's story in the book is rather upbeat. Like many people we were writing about, she's changing her life in a very positive way. There's something going on in America, and people like Sally, they're going to tell us something about it. And in 2009, Michael Williamson and I were driving through rural Tennessee, and we saw this guy selling almost literally the shirts off of his back, and he was hoping to make enough money to eat that day. We spent a couple hours with him, and nobody stopped, nobody bought anything, and he was very proud. This is not a man who wanted to take food stamps, welfare, any sort. He just wanted to work. He's in his 50s, he has limited skills, and no one will hire him. Back in 1983, I took these pictures of the blast furnace in Cleveland where my grandfather worked. It's gone. It's gone, just like most high-paying jobs for guys like those in my family. And what we ask in some place like America is, through the people we document, it's really their question. What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a nation that cares about tens and tens of millions of workers? Or do we just want to be a nation that cares what happens to hedge fund managers?